right. Welcome back, everybody, to another Future Focused, where we are living at the intersection of business, technology, and human experience. I am very much looking forward to my conversation today. Not only because we were having so much fun backstage, I almost lost track of time and forgot to hit record, but because we're actually going to be talking about two of my favorite technology areas and what it looks like at the intersection. And so those two are XR, extended reality, and artificial intelligence, and what happens when those two mix, and what does that mean for the future of tech and where it can go. So to navigate that conversation with me, I'm joined by Sven Brunner from Sphere. And so thanks so much, Sven, for joining me.
Thanks for having me, Christopher. Glad to be here.
Yeah, no problem. And now, based on the accent and the name, I don't want to make assumptions, but where are you located?
I'm located in the San Francisco Bay Area.
Okay.
So I live in the US, but I'm originally from Switzerland, which is very confusing for a lot of people. Because my name is Swedish. Sven is a
I was going to
Swedish
say
name.
Sven is not typically, it's a very
And
Nordic
yes,
name.
it's a Nordic name, and for a lot of people, both countries start with SW, Switzerland, Sweden, and I get a lot of like, oh, that's where IKEA is from. It's like, no, that's the other SW country. So I get a lot of mix up.
We're famous. We're famous for the mountains. Thank you very much.
Exactly, we have the
And
chocolate, the cheese, and the watches
watches
and stuff. Exactly, that kind of stuff. But I get it, right? It's super confusing. Swedish name, but from Switzerland, small countries in Europe. So but that's where I'm from. But I've been
and also you're in America now, and Americans are notorious for not knowing necessarily a ton about things outside the US and just kind of making broadband assumptions. So yeah, I get it.
to be fair, the Europeans are not much better when it comes to I don't think most
fair.
Europeans know the difference between Kansas and Kentucky or something like that. It's like they're similarly ignorant to so it's a global thing. It's not.
It is true. And despite the fact, it's funny you say that, because despite the fact that we are so much more globalized now as a result of technology, we know people from all parts of the globe, but we don't necessarily know about them. It's just kind of like, oh yeah, I know so-and-so from this country. You're like, do you know anything about them and their culture though? It's like, no. So, okay, cool. Well, so before we get into the discussion though, I am really curious. So you came from Switzerland, now you're here in the States, focusing on the intersection of AI and XR tech. But what is how did you end up getting into this space? Was this something you were always super technical? You kind of had dreams as a child of creating, AI tech, or was it something that came through roundabout ways?
So it's kind of a little bit both. So I definitely grew up as someone who was very I was a huge sci-fi fan for all my life. Since my early
XR
childhood.
and AI is definitely
exactly
in the realm of sci-fi, so that fits.
It has something to do with that for sure. And I always had so I come from a family of my parents have their own business, my grandparents had their own business, and for me it was always like kind of clear I want to do that myself as well, right? Have my own business. Very early on, I remember still like in like that was like elementary school. Everyone had their heroes, and my hero and role model was Bill Gates at the time. I wanted to be like Bill Gates, and I don't know, that was always like in me too, that I want to do something, right? But I didn't really know what. And then, I got older, went to college.
But technology and kind of the sci-fi piece was part of that. So you were gravitating in that area.
Oh yeah. I was, as you would, as a classical nerdy teenager, like played a lot of video games, was in all the sci-fi stuff, fantasy sci-fi, very, very traditional, almost stereotypical. And I went to college to study computer science and business.
Okay.
And towards the end of my college career or degree, Microsoft, back then, that was in 2015, Microsoft kind of presented the HoloLens 1. I'm not sure, maybe you remember that.
I'm very familiar. In fact, I did one episode where we actually were streaming part of it through the HoloLens.
Really? Oh wow! Okay.
Yeah, we were showing what it was capable. It was very fun. So for those of you watching and listening, go back to it. We've come a long ways, but it was even back then pretty cool.
Yeah, that was for me because Microsoft teased there's a big announcement, and I remember I was still back in Switzerland, and I watched it the live stream of the keynote when they presented it, and I was like blown away. That was like for me the kind of this, wow, this is like, again,
I want to focus.
sci-fi, right? It's like, wow, this is how you can make that happen. And
Yep.
me, I've always been more interested in like the how should I put it? Kind of to frame it out, actually, some people get upset about it, but for useful things. I'm not really when it comes to software, I'm not so for example, I'm not really on social media, for example, except LinkedIn for
Okay.
my career. It's not, I've never been very, except gaming, big entertainment guy, but never really gravitated to consumer
Well,
software.
but the entertainment side, it's for a purpose. Gaming is for a
Yes,
purpose. It's for
exactly,
entertainment. So it's serving a
exactly.
purpose.
That's
I
true.
know what you
That's true.
mean. And anybody who listens to my stuff, I am all about purpose-driven technology.
Hmm.
And there is no shortage of junk where it's just
Yeah,
like, okay, you chase technology because you could
yeah,
versus I see this gap, there's this problem, and I think there's a better way to do it, and technology is the enabler of that
exactly.
versus, hey, wouldn't it be great if we did this? And I see this in my industry a lot where it's like, wouldn't it be cool if we did this in VR? And you're like,
Mm,
but what would VR be adding to it?
yeah, yeah,
Well, it'd be so neat. And you're like, well, that doesn't sell well at the boards,
yeah,
at the executive council when you're asking for funding. Why should we do this? It'd be cool.
yeah,
Doesn't
yeah.
get you too
No,
far.
and that was for me exactly. That was this intersection of, it is cool,
Okay.
but it's actually useful as hell.
Purposeful.
Because exactly, because what you could do, I was just like seeing like so many things that this technology could enable, and I was like, that was kind of a moment for me. Like, I want to do something with this technology. I didn't know exactly what.
Okay.
And then what
Okay.
actually I went on to do is I talked to a lot of companies again in Switzerland to kind of understand a bit what needs could this technology really solve, right? Because in the enterprise, that's also why I really like the space. It's really, as we just talked about, it's about purpose. It's about, okay, why it needs to do something for me, right? As a company, it needs to
Yep.
enhance something, and yeah, that's like a lot of conversation, dozens of conversations. Then in the end, we came up with the concept of Sphere. That was back in 2016 or 17,
Okay.
and then like start developing. And then there was a whole journey, of course, until today. I made the move to the US about 4.5 years ago. So where we're incorporated now. And yeah, that's our passion now. And especially my passion was always when it comes to XR. So we're definitely come from an XR angle. AI is the new one that we're like putting in.
Okay.
But
Well, yeah, and I feel like AI is kind of like the internet. It's like
yes, it's foundational. Yes,
it's foundational. It's woven into everything. If you're a
exactly.
tech company, you're an AI company too, because you have to be able to do what you're trying to do. It's become so
Exactly.
ubiquitous.
But what we strongly believe. So again, maybe quickly to close that loop on the AR or the XR side, we're definitely more on the spatial side. I mean, now Tim Cook and Apple is all about spatial computing again. Like there's always like, it's been
Yep.
the oldest thing in our industry. It's always the terminology, right? It's AR, VR, MR, XR, spatial computing, metaverse. There's like a trillion. No one knows what this really is. I'm actually glad. I think spatial computing is actually a very good term to describe
I
also what
agree.
we're doing.
It helps
I like that term.
contextualize it.
Exactly. Because AR, so many definitions even exist. MR was the worst, right? There's so many definitions for it. Like even some companies like use it as a marketing term versus an actual factual what it is term.
I
But
remember being on a panel once and going, who on this panel can differentiate the difference between AR, VR, XR, and MR? And most people couldn't even define them,
yeah,
let alone be able to explain, well, it's actually this type of a thing. So yeah.
let alone that in a fluent conversation to kind of use the
Right.
right acronym at the right time. It's like that's then always like, even if you define it clearly, halfway into the conversation, everyone throws them around interchangeably, and I'll
I
probably
know.
even do it in this podcast, in this
It's
recording.
fine. It's fine
But
because we'll break it down and we'll keep it simple for folks.
but the spatial aspect was always very important for us. So the ability to anchor content into the physical world, right? Which is
Yes.
why we also came more from the augmented side than the virtual
Yep.
side. Now they're converging, but that's kind of where we're from. And I would also say from a multi-user collaboration has always been at the key, because for me it was always like, to make the most out of this technology, you got to be in a shared space. Because the most frustrating thing was the first time I had the headset on, no one else could see what I was seeing. No one else could be
And
part
if
of
you
my
watch some
experience.
videos, I mean, honestly, it is a very it's a bizarre, isolating experience when you
Yes.
don't include, when it's not
Yes.
collaborative and
Yes.
inclusive. It is very like, well, here's this person here with this headset, and I have no idea
Yeah.
what's going on with them. And it's actually almost more isolating
Yeah.
in many ways if you don't do it right.
Absolutely, and that's something. That's why we always stayed away from VR before. Now with pass through, now that you have this
Yeah.
relationship to the physical world, that was a purposeful decision for us. We wanted to be spatial and collaborative. That was kind of the key pillars, I would say, of our solution, of our software to this day. And our
Okay.
goal was always to kind of really change the way we communicate and collaborate. And obviously, a lot happened. Then COVID was really a big accelerator for that. Now we live in a world where no one works 5 day, or no one, or very few people work full time in office anymore. Few
Yeah.
people work fully remotely. It's the hybrid work world is here, and a lot of companies are actually looking for new like ways to navigate that, right? And that's kind of where we see ourselves fitting in as a company. That's kind of problem we want to solve. And how the AI now comes in, it's actually, as you said, I also see that as a very foundational technology, right? It's exactly the internet. It's a perfect analogy. That's also how I sometimes because I don't think it's not AI on its own does something. You need to combine it with something meaningful. And having said that, I think, it's almost funny.
Yeah.
I still remember that being a 90s kid. We had these text-based games, right, in the 90s, right, where
Yep. I
you
know.
typed in.
I was
And
right there with you,
it
man.
was probably there, yeah. And now it's almost interesting that ChatGPT and Bard and Gemini, it's the same, right? You have it's a text interface. We're back where we all started.
I know we kind of went backwards. It was like, okay,
Exactly.
we went
And
forward,
even
and then
though,
they're now back to this.
I mean, they're super powerful, but again, the interface to me was always a bit like, that's kind of a bit weird. It feels a bit like 90s. And I think that's also the big chance that
It's like a
opportunity.
90s RPG
Yeah.
in some ways.
Yeah,
It is
exactly.
kind of
Yeah.
like an 90s
What do you
RPG.
do
Like,
now?
hey,
And then you had the
here's my
time.
move. Like,
Exactly.
yeah, and then
Get
like,
the
oh, okay,
X
here's the
and
response.
what? Yeah, exactly. But I think that's also where we really feel like XR is the perfect. We sometimes call it.
Yeah.
It can give AI eyes and ears, right? It's like
Yes.
you instead of typing, I can look at something. I can talk to the AI, to the LLMs, to the generative AIs, and I think the interface through XR is just a much more natural way to interact with these again, umbrella term AI. And also what you can feed in, right? Like you
Well, and
see
this goes
things, so
back to
it's
even something you said. This goes back to something you said where I actually agree with you. I really like the idea of spatial computing
yeah.
as being the space we're talking about,
Mm-hmm.
because then it's like, well, where does AI fit into that? It's like, well, it's the way it enhances spatial computing, whether it's the user interface, the way you interact with the environment, whether it's the tools that are underlying and how it, does things, rather than, yeah, I actually really like the way you frame that up.
Yeah, no, I couldn't agree. It's for me, it was always like that. That's for me the big leap forward, right? There's a lot of people, that was always a bit of challenge for us in the XR industry initially, at least. Like, why would I do that on a headset? I have a computer, I have a smartphone, right? Isn't that enough, right? And initially,
Well,
I think
and without the spatial problem set, it actually was a legitimate
yes,
pushback to it.
yes,
Where it's
absolutely,
like,
absolutely.
if all I'm doing is looking at a screen, I would much rather look at a screen at my desk where I can
Yeah.
be free from a device. So I actually legitimately agreed with that. I'm like, yeah, if all you're doing is looking at a screen, then it's actually, if you're not talking about the spatial or environmental factors, you're right.
Actually,
Do it
it's
on a
actually
computer.
it reminds me just of something I read this week or last week on the Apple Vision Pro, right? There's this whole, like, obviously, like, a lot of people bought it. There's a big hype. And there was also
Tons of returns.
exactly. It was somewhat of a misleading news story that broke there, because they made it seem like every single person in the world is returning their Apple Vision Pro, which is a bit. But the funny thing was also, I read then through some of the criticisms that these people voiced. And it reminded me just what you said, because someone said, I work primarily with Excel spreadsheets. Was a horrible experience. I tried it for a full week. Horrible to work with. Like, well, yeah, that's not necessarily
Right.
that's not where this technology shines, right? Or maybe
No.
one day we can replace that. But if I have to work on an Excel spreadsheet on a financial projection, I don't do that in headset, right? Even though it's that's what we do as a company, and I'm a big believer in this technology. It doesn't have to solve every single thing in the world, right? There, it's totally okay
No.
to do certain things on your computer, right? That's not a problem.
Well, and going back to even what you said, I've got 7 kids, and so we
Oh wow.
watch a ton of like YouTube stuff, and there's a couple content creators we follow, and there's a big trend right now of like YouTubers spending 100 hours in their Apple Vision Pro,
Mm.
and you watch this and you go, that's not what you're
Yeah.
supposed to do
Yeah.
with this. It's not.
Yeah.
And again, some of the things we talked about before, it's this isolating experience where
Yeah.
they're walking around and all their friends, and they're like, ah, ha, ha, look at all the, and their friends are like, I don't know what is going, because I cannot experience it.
Yeah.
But again, it's one of those, you're using the tool wrong. And then sometimes the reaction is, well, I wouldn't really use this. And it's like,
Yeah.
well, yeah, obviously not for that purpose. I
Yes,
would hope
exactly.
you wouldn't. Which
Exactly.
to be fair, and you've seen the cycles of this in the industry, the marketing around XR has not necessarily helped. Like I
No.
even see the Apple Vision Pro commercial. One of the things they did
Yes.
was like a dad playing with his kids with his headset on. And I'm like, that's, if I ever do that, I told my wife, if I ever do that, please just take it away and throw it away. Because if I get to a point where I'm like, I'm interacting through a screen all the time, that's not the purpose.
No, I mean, and you're so spot on. I think sometimes especially the XR industry, AI industry, to an extent as well, is its own worst enemy.
Yes.
When we look
Yes,
at,
it is.
I mean, I remember all the way back, we talked about the HoloLens 1 days, Microsoft back in 15, and we actually just had, I showed a coworker a video yesterday it was a bit newer to the XR industry of what they had in these promo videos in 2015. It was a complete marketing stunt. It was so far away from, I mean, you remember HoloLens 1, which had the tiny field of view, super clunky, super heavy, very limited interaction. And in the videos, it's like, you even see people making gestures that were not even supported on the device. The field of view is gigantic. And that was the expectation. And everyone was just disappointed. Everyone's like, what? In the video, they do this like, and now it looks like small and jittery and that was, but it's all the way then meta came, right? With this metaverse, which for a lot of people was super dystopian, right? They didn't want that. Like to feel exactly what you said. You don't want to, I mean, I'm also someone who likes to be outside and I enjoy our physical world. That's also why I always,
and all the marketing for like the Quest 2s and stuff is like people riding bicycles with VR, and you're like,
exactly,
that's not even safe. Like, why are you doing this? Like, what is going on?
Exactly, and that gives also the Apple Vision Pro. I would say the only criticism I have about the device is how it's marketed. I think it's marketed too much as a that gives the false expectation that you can now throw away your iPhone and your laptop and that's all you need, and that's not the case, right? I would say it's a very, I mean, we've had it for a few weeks now. It's a very, very good device. It moves. I really believe it moves the industry forward. They set new standards. But it's by no means a replacement for your computer and phone. I think I just told someone this week, it showed me the first time that we could potentially get there at one point, because I think the ingredients are now there. But I mean, for us, that's also why for us, it's like, hey, in the enterprise, you don't wear that like 12 hours a day, right? You wear it for what's necessary, where it provides value for the tasks you need. And then by all means, take that off and go outside, get some fresh air, right? That's the thing, the way. And that's also why I really always like the AR piece, right? Because it incorporates the physical world as well. It's not so isolating.
And I actually think AR helped normalize, if we look back, because the other thing that's interesting about this was, I remember when COVID came out and the Quest 2 really accelerated things big time. Yeah, it really did. The Quest and the Quest 2 really all of a sudden, one, made it consumer available and all this other stuff. But one of the things, it's been around for a long time. I remember being at a VR conference with one of the early folks who was using this, and it was like 1970 or so. I mean, it was, so the stuff isn't brand new, and it's been in these cycles. But I think this hype cycle that we talk about has actually been, in some ways, its worst enemy. Because instead of people really seeing, hey, here's the appropriate way to use it, which then drives the vendors and the hardware providers to focus on solving for those problems, you created this vision of what it was that actually was never there. And then there was no way it was ever going to achieve that. There was just no way. And then it just let people down. And it was like, well, And then you saw the starts and stops.
Absolutely, yeah. And I think and I always have to be cautious, right? We always felt like for years, this is the year of XR, right? This is where it's finally going to break. And we feel like that again this year. But I think it's also a bit different this time around, because I think a lot changed over the last few years. And I think there's still a lot of miscomprehension about like the space in general. Like a lot of people feel it's like still very gimmicky. And there's a lot, not going to lie, there is a lot of gimmicky stuff
There's a lot of
going
gimmicky
around.
stuff, but so just so you know, from my background, I have continued to be one of the voices who says we're just not, it hasn't reached its full cycle maturity yet, but it's not going anywhere. Because again, spatial computing, when we think about it in that sense, it matters, and the environment has never been more ripe for it. When you think about even some of the things we talked about in the intro of the globalization of things, the nature of hybrid work, there's just so many things that you go, no, it actually solves real problems.
Yes.
There's still some work to do. And I actually was really excited when Apple finally got into the game, because to me, that was an indicator of we've reached a new threshold of maturity. And usually once Apple throws their chips in the game, you're like, okay, it's probably going to stick. It'll continue morphing and evolving. And, it won't, the iPod didn't stick around forever, but it really actually turbocharged this whole idea of personalized technology that you could really start to do crazy stuff with.
And we felt that immediately, that effect. It was because it came at the right time, right? It was like metaverse hype was starting to die down a bit. Lots of people were like ridiculing this whole concept. I think it was mostly wrongly presented. I think there's very good aspects to it. But again, that's maybe another topic. But then Apple came in. Everyone's like, oh wow, okay, exactly what you said, right? The signal. It's mostly the signal that Apple brings. The device is very good, but that's not even the most important part, right? The most important part is really the signal it sends. Apple is one of the most trusted brands in the world, right? They stand for product excellence. Whether you're an Apple fan or not, I think nobody denies they put out very good products and usually not the first in the game, but they definitely have a high level. I would say that's the same with this device. Very high level of polish that goes into these devices. So that's exciting. And what for me was always like and that's also kind of when we look at both AI and XR. The really interesting part for me is also because a lot of people talk, especially when it comes to AI, it's a threat, right, to your job, and I see that too. I mean,
it's perceived that way. There are legitimate threats.
Yes,
there are It's similar to like the XR thing, where it's like, is it threatening in certain areas? Yes. But is it this catastrophic threat? Well, it could be if we make some really stupid decisions with it. But I don't think we'll go. I don't see us going that path.
No, I think we're cognizant enough to understand this is something that we need to be careful about. At least for the really that they would go full Skynet and start I don't know, take over control our nukes and blow up the whole planet. I think that's obviously something it's. I mean, we joke about it. It's always technically a possibility, but I think people are that's something that we're aware of, right? It's not something that we blindly walk into. But the other thing is also like a lot of people feel just like this is me versus technology, right? The technology is coming after my job or after my creativity and things like that. And there's an element to that, right? I think for me, it's always like it's always been a shift in all of human. There's a lot of professions that don't exist anymore today because we don't need them anymore, right? Technology evolves. I think it's definitely faster this time with AI. It happens much more rapidly than maybe in the past. But I think also with XR, this is where the XR or the fusion is also so interesting to me. That has XR is very human centric. Because you're wearing the headset. You're interacting with content. AI enhances it actually, we sometimes also talk about that. It gives you superpowers, right? So it's basically, and sometimes we even use the analogy of like when you think of Iron Man, right? Jarvis. That's kind of the analogy. You're full in control, right? But you have your helper, which is AI. AI is there to support you, to help you, to make you more productive, to make you be able to whatever you do better, right? And I think that's a
Right.
very empowering way to look at it, rather than look at, oh, it's coming after me, right? No, it can actually help you to do, or maybe even evolve as a professional, right? Do
Right.
more mundane tasks you don't even have to do yourself anymore, or it's much easier to let the AI work on it for you, and you focus on more like, where it really needs a human touch, right? Where our
Yep.
uniqueness as
Which
a
spatial
human.
computing, when you think about it in the terms of spatial computing, now you're talking about true superpowers in a way that
Yeah,
you didn't have access to before. Because going back to our joke about like a lot of these large language ones, it feels like more of a 1990s video game where it's
yeah,
like, do this and then it does it. It's like, well, that's fine if you're sitting again at a computer. But when you're trying to do things where the environment or your spatial capacity actually is there. Honestly, AI without XR is actually not that much help to you
yeah. I
without
agree.
the
I mean,
XR piece.
yeah. I mean, I'm not sure how it's for you, but for me, it was like, and I think a lot of people were a bit like that when obviously ChatGPT came out. What was it, like about a year ago? I think everyone's super like, would use it like, I don't know, 5 hours a day, right? Me included, right? Just to try it out, right? See what it could do.
Yep.
And I've seen myself using it less and less and less over the last year, because I found like, initially I was like, okay, yeah, it's cool. And then I found myself mostly using it for, because I'm not a native speaker, if I have to write a proposal or something like that, it's good to like,
Yeah.
spell, or also as a glorified spell checker, right? Checking grammar, rewriting a sentence. It's pretty good at that. I'm really happy
Yep.
to have that at my disposal. But I mean, as information retrieval was too unreliable. Half the time, like all the information was wrong. And obviously there's also not a lot of specific
I
stuff
mean,
in
it
there,
goes
right?
back to what we were saying in terms of purpose driven. I think
Yes.
they've the hype of you can use this for everything. Chat GPT will raise your children, and then you're like, well, not really. But if I'm trying to do something related to creation of working with text, it's
Yeah.
pretty good. And then again, the image generation came and it was like, well,
Yes.
it's still pretty clunky. But if you're just trying to get an image of something instead of searching the internet or trying to find the perfect thing or creating it in some illustrator well, actually now I can kind of create it. So again, those purposes we've started to see, okay, and I still don't think we've even tapped to the surface of it.
No.
But to your point, its purpose and actually how narrow it is has come to light.
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly. And I think that's also how we look from it. Like, I mean, a lot of also companies did that. They just integrated AI into their product just because you had to
Right.
have an AI angle, right? Everyone was. I think every single SaaS product had an AI feature, and
Literally, I
some.
feel like every text field on any product anymore has an AI assistant.
Yes.
You're like,
Yeah.
I don't need help writing the subject to my email, but if I want
Exactly.
it, I
Yeah.
guess I can click this button.
Yeah, I mean, even like, I don't know, what did I order somewhere where I just a simple like put something in your basket online and order. There was an AI agent to help you with that. Yeah, I'm good. But there's, I think a lot of people just did that for the sake of it, right? And
Yeah.
sometimes it's also good being a startup. You don't have that luxury. You cannot just like randomly do stuff, gimme key, because you have your resource constraint, right? And sometimes it's actually a
Yep.
healthy thing. So how we also look at it is like, hey, okay, what can you actually apply it to that makes sense? And maybe to give you an example, which for example, could really be then. I mean, we're not there yet, but say you put a headset on, right? You're somewhere. Let's say you have a complex piece of machinery in front of you.
Yep.
Something is wrong. You don't know really what. You walk. You just look at it, and then you start talking to your AI co-pilot, however you want to call it. It's like, hey, what's going on here? Pull up the manual for this part, right? And it just pulls up, and by just looking at it, we can identify what you want, retrieve
Yes.
information for that specific part. So incorporating the space and potentially even overlaying it on top of and it can come back like, okay, this is wrong. This should look differently, right? This is not according to
Yep.
specification, and highlight it in your physical space, right? And I think that would bring the whole game to a whole other level, right? Something
Yep.
we're currently exploring and also looking into it. And I think these are just an example, but these are, I think, the really exciting pieces or features or use case you can achieve with combining XR and AI, right, in a very novel way. And again, you could potentially do the same thing if you would go like take a picture on your phone, upload it to a website, and then, but it's like, or to an LLM and things like that. But it's a whole other thing. With XR, it can be so natural, right? It can be
Yes.
actually that's something we really believe that moving forward, especially for these type of tasks, like the most natural way to interact with, be it AI or computers in general, is through a headset and being able to work with that. At least how we see it or predict
Well,
it.
no, and I think it's a really good point, because one of the things that I see people struggle with a lot is the use cases.
Yeah.
It is, and in many ways, some of the things that I see is a lot of knowledge work isn't necessarily spatial in nature.
Mhm.
And so when you have decision makers whose jobs are not necessarily spatially dependent, it is hard to put your head in it and go, what would we do with this? Because I know when Meta came out with, it was like, oh, you can do your meetings in VR. And it was one of those things where it's like, wait, so before I go into a web meeting, I got to go find my headset, charge it, put it on so I can sit and stare at a screen of a fake version of you. Like, I'd rather just click the enter the Zoom meeting type
Yeah.
of a thing. But where for me, I was like, where the AI infusion of it to me makes so much sense is back in my GE days, we were doing a lot of stuff in the service space, and we were using the HoloLens and HoloLens 2 a lot
Mhm.
because of the fact you could have the schematics and you could have someone on the back end, a subject matter expert, see what a service technician was doing and be giving them specific feedback to it. And so as I think about, where AI can come into the mix, the one thing with it was, going back to your point, there was a lot of waste in that
Yeah.
process. The service technician had to kind of clunk through the clunky user interface, had to hope that everything was there, had to do it kind of on their own, then call for help back to the main
Mhm.
center. A subject matter expert would have to then be like, no, that's not right. Hang on, let me try and get you the right stuff. Versus if you have that AI assistance right alongside, the number of things I just even think back to when we were exploring this, where, like you had said, where you could be like, I'm working on this product. Can you pull this up? Versus trying to figure out how to find all that stuff. And some people might hear that and think, oh, that's a threat to that person on the back end who was helping that person. But what we found was it actually was not scalable, because
Yeah.
you would have these frontline service people who would call like a 20-year technician for something that was like just
Yeah.
base. They'd get on the thing and be like, really? Turn that crank. Good grief. Like, why? Versus an AI assistant could have helped with some of that stuff. So the technicians could have focused on the bigger, more complex, okay,
Exactly.
hey, we're really working through a tough one. I'm going to need to actually support you at a higher level.
Exactly. And maybe to give people some peace of mind in terms of like job loss and things like that around this use case specifically. I cannot say who it is. It's a customer of ours, but they basically told us that and it's a very similar case, right? Where they have specialists that need to be there. They're basically waiting for calls and helping their customers. It's a very, very large company. Um,
Yep.
and they said they need to do something, especially on the service piece, because there is not enough knowledgeable people in the world for them to
There's not.
hire. It's just a short. It's nothing to do with like firing people. It's they have just no way to um, keep up with the demand. Even right, everything gets more
No.
complex. We get more globalized. Everything's so distributed. It's not languages. You need to have everything in different languages, different time zones, and so on. It's very, very hard, especially if the volume is high. Exactly what you just said, right? It's not. It just helps you to kind of actually focus on the more meaningful stuff. It's also a safety thing,
Yep.
right? If you cannot maintain certain equipment in the right way, it can be dangerous.
Yep.
So there's also that aspect. So it's not really. It's more about like keeping up with demand and actually because they were like, hey, there's no way. Otherwise, we have to start shutting down plants and things like that. We don't have the people, right? It's
Well, and
just
what's
not.
interesting about it was, to the whole job loss thing, we actually found, and I've done a fair amount of like advisory work on this space as well, because
Mhm.
the market is huge. What I found, and even in my GE days, we actually found it gave greater career mobility for
Mhm.
people, because actually what it allowed us to do through having this technology was, you didn't need as advanced or skilled of a technician to get started. because they had the hardware and the technology to say, you may not be a subject matter expert, but you'll be supported by a subject matter
Yes.
expert. So that actually, it made it easier for people with less skills to actually get started. But then there actually was career laddering because we had some of the senior folks who were like, I don't want to do this global travel crap anymore. Like, I'm not interested in sitting on a plane all the time. I'm past that point in my career. And they would have left the organization. But instead we said, well, what if you could work in the command center and you're the, I mean, you got the 40, you've seen it all, but we can't send you everywhere. What if we could give you the flexibility? You can work from home. You can be kind of on call to be that specialist that we rate. And we actually created job tiers to support this. So going back to the like, oh, am I going to lose my job or is it worse for me? Actually, everywhere we implemented this, it actually opened up possibilities that historically would have just been impossible.
No, that's a really cool example. Yeah, no, yeah, and that's exactly, you touched on that. That's also such an exciting thing that you can almost teleport yourself and your knowledge anywhere else right now with people. And so exactly what you said. It's a big challenge. I just had a conversation with someone in that apparently I wasn't aware of that, how challenging this situation is in both Canada and the US. Massive shortage of like skilled technicians, especially in rural areas. Massive shortage. They have apparently the Department of Labor has a huge campaign this year with billions of dollars they're investing to try to skill and level people up, because it's been, there's a shortage of instructors, right? Exact same problem, right? It's maybe not in a corporate way, but the instructors maybe in like the city, right? And you have all the kids who would be interested in maybe that profession. They just, it's too far, right? Or they cannot every day come in and things like that. A lot of it, you need physical equipment, right? Like someone made the example of a helicopter technician. I mean, this is like if you live in a rural place and you don't have a helicopter at your disposal every day, and there's no school nearby.
And you can't click on a computer simulation where you're clicking buttons with it. You actually need to, again, this is where the spatial and environmental factors, they matter because they're critical to the experience. I see this a lot in robotics as well, where it's like, you can't play with a computer screen of robot. You actually need to see the parts and be able to see how big is this and how do these things fit together. And so spatially it matters. And to your point, on the technician front, I remember that was a huge gap where it's like, we can't find people to do it. But with XR technology, you were able to be like, we know somebody who has mechanical skills, maybe not the specialty that we have, but we can get them a device and we can then work through them with a seasoned professional who then guides them. We actually just opened up massive possibilities, and the potential is huge. So that's where I think, to your point, people who are afraid this is coming for their job, like, oh my gosh, we're going to end up in headsets and all this. What's the point of working anymore? It's like, no, actually, even jobs that, I know I'm kind of going on a rant on this, but I get really frustrated because I get a lot of people who are like, I just don't see it. And I'm like, it's there. Jobs where historically you would say flexibility is not an option for you. This opens this up to say, actually, yes, it is. And as robotics and AI grows even more, I think we can get to a point where you could be controlling a non-human element on the other side from your house as a mechanic type of a thing. I mean, the possibilities are endless.
Exactly. That's a really good point, right? We think of like almost two classes of jobs, right? Jobs that you can do from home or from an office. You're just, the classical knowledge worker jobs. And then you have the more blue collar jobs where you have to be somewhere in the, almost sometimes in the dirt and on site and things like that. And in a lot of cases you do, but right, this actually allows that part of the workforce to actually also move into that direction, right? And also to upskill. I think it's also that, right? It's like to not that everyone, some people also, obviously still someone needs to execute it. But as you said, at one point this can also, be controlled through robotics and specialized roboters. It can also be just in general a much more efficient way to do all of that, right? And again, as you said, you're back home in your control center, and especially the more seasoned people, right, who have the knowledge, right? And it's also win-win because you train people up faster, as you said, right? You don't necessarily need to be the soup. We have seen that also with customers, right? You don't need to be the top specialist from day one, right? But you can do a lot more on day one or day two or day three than before, because you have either, and that's also kind of, we see that sometimes it's a tiered system. You go somewhere, the AI can hopefully help you already, like on the job. If it gets too much, you bring in the human expert, right? Which again is a really nice element, right? You first for the simple ones that would overburden them, like maybe some super, oh, which button do I need to click here, right? Which is probably trivial. The person just doesn't know. But when it gets really, really complex, maybe even the AI cannot help yet or anymore, then you can still bring in the human, right? They see what you see, they can work with you, they can collaborate with you. That's kind of also one of our taglines, right? We basically, how we market the solutions a bit in a way that, it doesn't location, time and space, you can collaborate across time and space, right? It doesn't really matter where you are. And we're actually also working on something which I'm very excited about, to also transcend that then further into language, because that's also a big barrier sometimes that you can't, especially human communication.
I was just going to ask about that from an AI intersection piece.
Exactly.
This to me is another huge opportunity where you may have two people, but they speak a different language.
Yes.
And you're not going to dial a translator in for this all the time. But now in real time with artificial intelligence, it can hear what you're saying, instantly translate it, and I don't even hear your voice. I just hear AI saying it in my voice, and now you can cross cultural and language barriers seamlessly.
Exactly. You just described exactly the feature we're working on. So that's something we're going to ship hopefully later this year. I think that's also super exciting, right? Really, that's such why I'm so excited about this technology. It's such an inclusive technology in a sense that it really helps people to better understand each other, right? When I say to enhance communication and collaboration, that's also something I mean, right? It's really this on a very fundamental level, right? That obviously some people are like, especially sometimes also here in the US, like, who needs that? Everyone speaks English. Like, well, there's several billion people in the world who don't speak English, right? Don't forget that.
And honestly, though, I just even think, even sometimes people who speak English, there's a difference between speaking it and understanding and having fluency in it.
Yes.
And I think, having worked for major global organizations, that's a stupid assumption to make. It's like, oh, well, they speak English. It's like, even if they do, they still may have no idea what you're actually trying to communicate to them, just because they're like, I heard these words and I'm contextualizing them through my cultural context. That doesn't always match up.
Yeah, absolutely. And me being from Europe, actually being from a country where we have 4 official languages, it's that's always something you think about, right? Different languages, because let's face it, language and understanding each other is a key thing, right? On a very fundamental human way. If I cannot communicate with you, it's very hard to create a shared understanding.
Speaking of blue collar work, before I got into the corporate workforce, I worked construction. Mm-hmm. And so again, you didn't always speak the languages of the people you were working with.
Yeah.
And it was extremely difficult. Yeah. Even something as simple as like, okay, we need to pick this thing up and move it over there. And everything becomes exponentially harder, which AI can radically, especially when you think about like what we're talking about, technician stuff, where it's highly technical, specialized. There's not a lot of room for margin of error where you're like, well, you get the gist of it. So I think we're okay.
Really, like, maybe also to make it concrete for people, really think of like nuclear reactors, right? Think of launch pads for the rockets we send to space, right? These are the kind of things where they're super. That's also sometimes why I don't like the term blue collar work, because it's like what these people do is highly complex. It's insanely complex. And a lot of what knowledge workers sometimes do is nowhere close as complex. And to have them better supported and
you're back. Oh. You buzzed for a minute, but you're good.
Yeah, I cut out for a second.
No, you're good. But I agree with what you were saying in terms of, I actually agree that blue collar has a stigma associated with it, that actually having worked in highly specialized, I think blue collar, at least for me, helps break the difference between, okay, like knowledge worker as in you're working at a computer versus you're working over here. But honestly, to your point, I completely agree. I did some work with NASA, and some of these engineers working on this, if you're like, I think of the Boeing stuff with the door blowing off. Do you really want the person working on your jet that you're flying across the country, do you really want them not really having
Yeah.
the special capabilities to do this kind of stuff? And XR and AI can radically reduce the
Absolutely. I mean,
barriers in there.
I think the Boeing thing actually made a lot of people, and I fall into that as well myself sometimes, that you think just things work, right? An airplane just works, right? You have
It just
flown a
works.
hundred times, it just works. I mean, you don't worry about that, right? It just works. But and then you see things like that, it's like, oh, actually there's it does just work, right? If you mess up, it
No.
has consequences, severe.
And the
And
margin of error, a lot of this stuff is, the consequences are massive
yeah,
for
yeah.
slight margins of error.
Yes. And I think what a lot of people don't realize, it's like everything has to be, that's also why these things happen, right? Things have to go faster. There's more. I mean, we've the flight volume obviously went down during the pandemic, but I think just to stay at the airplane example, right? There's I think 2023 was a record year in terms of flight work globally. There's more and more demand, right? There's more people flying. We have a whole continent in Asia where people, get more income, travel more, and so on. That drives
Yep.
all these. There's a lot happening, right? And the if you don't also advance tools to keep up with that, then things like that. I mean, I'm not saying like XR would have prevented that. I think it's also like just bad, like in general, like quality control they
Yeah,
had.
no,
But
but to your
it's an
point,
example, right? It's yeah,
it's an example. And I think your point with that is you also have to look at the global and societal things that are
yeah,
happening right now, which we're at a really interesting stage in society where the workforce that is starting to transition out is significantly greater than the workforce that's transitioning in. And so, at a time when we're trying to grow and globalize and do more of this stuff, actually, a lot of that knowledge and expertise is actually going. And I understand. I mean, again, like I think of the example where some of our more seasoned technicians who were the best of the best of the best,
mm,
they just got to an age where they're like, I don't want to do this crap
mm,
anymore.
mm,
I'm not interested in doing it. And at the time, the options were, well, then you retire or you get on the plane and do what you said you don't want to do. And the thing with them is a lot of them were at a stage in their life where they could go, deuces, like I'm out
yeah,
then.
yeah.
Versus this is opening up opportunities to say, hey, that doesn't have to be the only answer.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's also exactly as you said, right? Even if you would like think of someone who goes part time and just gives, passes on their knowledge, it's already super valuable, I think, for especially all these companies, right? Where a lot of the knowledge is in our heads, right? And in even then also to advance the whole AI, right? That's also something that a lot of people forget. AI is not like, doesn't do these things automatically. It needs to be trained
No,
on
it doesn't.
something, right? We still need to come
Well,
up with
I was
like the
actually just going to go there, and I was going to see if you were going to go there with it, because that was the next stage I was going to in terms of how AI can integrate into this. Is like you said the same thing, like with how we take planes for granted, or they just
Mhm.
work.
Yeah.
And AI is a say, oh, AI just works. It's like,
Yeah.
no, it doesn't. It has to be
Yeah.
trained on all of this stuff. And I think, especially when you think about things like manufacturing and all this other stuff, that stuff is normally locked in people's
Yeah.
heads.
Yeah. It's
Making it
it
digital actually creates more data to help support a better future.
and that's actually also why I think again XR comes into play. To give you a concrete example, we
Yep.
had that was like a couple of years ago. We had we want to do some like AI initiative or project with a customer, and we started, and then we were like, okay, now we need. It was about like deviation analysis. You have like
Okay.
a machine. You compare the state that it's in with the state it should be, and point out, okay, it's not safe to operate. It was not as advanced of what we talked about now, because AI made a major advancements in the last 2
Oh
years,
yeah,
but
it's made
that
some
was kind of the
major.
idea. Yeah, like
Yep.
to put it mildly. But and then we're like, okay, we need roughly 30 to 40 images of that asset, to train the model. They're like, what do you mean to train the model? I was like, well, yeah, I mean, it doesn't happen automatically. How do you think
Yeah, it
these
doesn't
we
just
can
know.
no, exactly. Why would it? I mean, this is like maybe in the movies, but in the real world, it just doesn't know that. And they're like, oh no, there's no way we cannot even that compliant or that sensitive data is confidential. We cannot even get that out of the and so on. And it kind of died down the whole thing. and or also like the capturing of it is like, well, they were like, well, do we have to go in there with a photo camera? And I walk around like, well, yeah, kinda. If you, and it's actually what you just said, right? But with XR, you can also solve a bit the scalability and the training problem in a way that you can train while you look at it, right? That's actually also the really interesting thing. You can enhance these models by just feeding in the data that you see, and that's kind of how you build these models even in the first place for some of these things. Because as you said, right, realistically, these, especially for manufacturing, for all these types of work, that's not necessarily super well digitized in like spatial data in a database somewhere. It's like at
even
best
if
you
it's
have a bunch of
digitized,
PDFs.
the spatial components are not. And even going back to one of the biggest gaps, and this is why I think it's going to be so helpful in this space, which is where the spatial component comes in, is you may have the CAD specs and you may have all this, but how it's designed in theory versus how it works in practice. I mean, and that's not just in manufacturing, that's just in real life. Like, oh, here's the model and what we're going to do. It's like, well, by the time we actually put it in, we actually had to make all these modifications. And then after 10 hours, it started doing this. So we had to do all this. And I think back to, you go back to it. That is part of why somebody who's been a specialist for 20, 30 years is so valuable, because they have all that context, and AI doesn't have context. And spatial is what gives things context, which a static image, I mean, even I think about a static image is not the best for training AI on context, because it's like, well, it doesn't understand the environment. It doesn't understand what's around it and how all these things work, versus capturing all that real-time data of all of this. You're actually starting to give it context in new and different ways than it's ever had before.
Exactly. That's the key word. The context that's the word. I think that's really like
it matters.
It matters. And I really think or of course you can technically walk around with your phone, but that's not how you use your phone. I really think headset and XR then is really the way that this is natural, right? You don't even feel it. You don't even see, it just happens automatically. And that's where you can really solve that problem, right? You can't give, because again, back to the ChatGPT text, there's no context, right? Or I need to give all the context. I need to describe everything. I mean, there's already people who like have, prompt engineering. How do you do that? Which there's value in that, obviously, right? You need to understand how to ask questions. But what if you
But a lot of that prompt engineering, well, exactly, because a lot of that prompt engineering is giving it the context it needs that it could get just from the environment. But because it doesn't have, like you said, I think you said in the beginning, AI and XR merging is giving AI eyes and ears.
Yes,
which is huge in giving it context, because it can start to see and hear and experience things, and it couldn't before. And it's just very difficult without that.
And I think what a lot of people, when we just talk about training and data and context, I think what a lot of people don't realize is there's a big gap still on the AI side between something like ChatGPT or even Gemini. These models are trained on publicly available data. I mean, there's already a whole like lawsuit war going on what you can train on. I mean, that's only going to continue. That's going to be a discussion we're probably going to have for the next few years. But what's never in there is, let's say, I mean, I can say Boeing is not a customer of ours, so we can use them as an example. Let's say, you have this example with that door, the manual for that door, wherever that bolts would have to be. That's not on ChatGPT or Gemini.
No, it is not.
Ever. That's never going to be in the public domain. You don't want it in the public domain. It would be dangerous, right? Or think about nuclear reactor. You don't want to have your plans openly in the internet for everyone to download and attack or something like that. Would be terrorists would have a field day.
And even in theories where companies start to, and this is why I think, to your point, going back to the very beginning, the XR, despite some of the naysayers, I'm like, this is going to, because the trajectory of AI right now, it needs context.
Yes.
We're going to hit a ceiling. We're going to hit a ceiling where it's like it no longer has enough context to continue advancing. And to me, the XR technology is the difference, because even going back to the example of we keep using Boeing, but fine. Let's say you even had your own internal large language model built on your own internal systems, on your own internal IP, and all this other stuff. It still only has the non-contextual information that you have, versus you give eyes and ears to your technicians who are now out there seeing it. They're experiencing it all the time. You now can further train that model to have added context. And to the people who think, oh no, we're just training our own jobs away, AI does not handle exceptions well. And I think that's the part that people sometimes forget, is that even if, let's say, you could train ChatGPT, or not ChatGPT, let's say through one of these XR technologies, a company could train its own proprietary model to solve 80% of the technical problems that it has. Those 20%, AI will never get there. And quite frankly, that 80%, most companies can't even put a dent in the 80%, and they can't ever get to the 20% because they spend so much of their time and resources on the 80%. They actually can't get to the 20%, let alone get to the innovation of staying ahead of, here's where we are today. How do we think about what's next? So I think it's one of those things where all it does is just push the work to higher order, more complex, more contextual, which is actually the stuff people like doing. Nobody likes being like, you know what I love doing? Pushing the same button every single day. Like,
for
I
8
really
hours,
wish I just did more of that for 8 hours. Just hit the button over and over and over and over again. And so it's actually, to me, opening up new possibilities.
Exactly. And and you touched on this. By the way, I don't want to make a big announcement yet, but this is we're going to announce something soon that goes very much in that direction. I was just gonna say that. But I think, when we look at, for historically, at least XR had always one big problem, and that was the content problem, or the data problem, right?
Yes.
You have where do you get the data from? Like 3D data, any of that. And exactly what we said. I think AI, it's not so pronounced yet, but I think it has a bit of a context problem.
It has a very big context problem. It has a massive context problem.
And the beautiful thing is, if you merge the two, you kind of can solve each other's biggest issue, right? XR can give context to AI, and AI can solve the content problem, because you can actually, before, what you have to do today, right? If you want to replicate that experience, you need to do it manually, right? You need to go through your files, pull out the right PDFs, whatnot, maybe ask someone, create a work experience. You can't do it, right? Our tool can do that, but
had to have a knowledge base where all this stuff is tagged, and all, just massive.
It's a lot, right? Work. And you can make that so much faster, instead of and that's where a lot of people are shying away from, really deploying that at scale. It's like, oh, we don't have the people for that. Who's going to do that? Who's going to maintain that, right? These things change all the time, right? Our manuals change. They're not static. We cannot always redo everything all the time. It's like a massive pain point for them. And AI can solve all of that, right? You can keep these models being trained. Always the latest information is available. You never have to worry about that. And you enhance the training by the data you feed in through XR. So for us, it's a perfect match.
It's a win. It's honestly a win-win. And on that front, even going back to, again, I always try and address the underlying fear people have, which I get it. It's like this fear of, if it's taking something from us, then there's less. And I continue to see, having spent my entire career at this intersection, that we just somehow create more with more. And so it's like, well, it doesn't make sense. The math doesn't add up. And I used to be a math teacher. So I'm like, don't ask me to write an equation on how it works, because it doesn't. But somehow the innovation creates more from it that then allows it to go further. Because even going back to the data that it creates, you need people. And again, I think this is just where a lot of people don't understand how AI works. The training process requires human beings.
Yes.
Like, that's the other thing. There are people who are going, wait, that's an exception. Like, wait, no. Like, so even in theory, the person going out and capturing all this information as they're part of doing, somebody then has to review it and say, wait, no, that's an exception to this. We don't want that to become part of the model as a good example, because if we do, this is going to go sideways, type of a thing. So there is so much stuff. And that's where, for me, when AI really started taking off, it was the end of 2022 was when generative AI really hit the market. To me, that was an indicator of, XR tech, this is going to, and again, I won't be the one that goes, this is the thing, because I think there's still some barriers that we got to overcome. But to me, what you described of, we've got this problem and this problem, and there's almost this stone wall in between them, and we can't. AI was like, boom, it knocked the wall out, and you went, well,
Yeah.
this opens up all sorts of new possibilities.
100%. And maybe to the point that people are worried about jobs taken away with new technology. I mean, I always also make examples to look back in history, right? I know 150 years ago there were no cars. We all had horses, right? And probably there were jobs that went away, but think about now as well, also in a country like the US, how many hundreds of thousands of jobs are in the automotive industry, right? And that's something that didn't even exist 150 years ago or 100 years ago. And obviously it's a bit scary at the beginning, right? You need to maybe adjust a little bit, but as you said, I think with innovation we create a much bigger pie, right? It's not like
we do.
It's certain things go away, but overall everything grows, right? And that's kind of how we advance as a species, right? You cannot obviously it needs to be with guardrails. I mean, we talked about that, right?
Yes.
Think from what I've heard, you're also, and I'm very much that too. AI is great, but it needs to be like closely watched. We need to regulate it properly, not to stifle innovation, but also to to make sure not the
to
most
use
dangerous
wisdom and
things.
discernment.
Exactly. And I think then it's a gift, or it can be a gift for all of us, and make all of our lives better. We didn't even be so much we could talk about, right? At healthcare, where it's has also where we do certain things. There's so many things that people sometimes don't realize how great things technology can do to actually enhance our lives, right? I think over the last few years I think it had a lot to do with like big tech and social media, where we feel like, oh, they're all just stealing our data, they're exploiting us, and some do, but a lot of it is actually really beautiful things that enhances all of our lives and makes everything better, or at least parts of our, not everything, but parts of our lives better. And I think that's the, I don't know, a message when I ever, I'm a technology enthusiast. I see technology always as something it could solve something. Obviously cognizant that there's negative aspects of technology too, but I think overall it moves us forward.
Well, and I think my view on this, because I often look at where AI is and all technology is going, because I also love studying history and seeing the ecclesiastical wisdom of nothing is really new. And so even AI and XR, it's like, look what's new. And it's like, it's not really new. It's a different version of it. When, like you use the example of when the car came out, there were people who were terrified nobody would have jobs because who's going to clean up the horse poop? And it was like, oh, well, I guess we just are doing different things now. And actually, you know what? It's actually a better job than what it was before, type of a thing. So I think, yes, are there terrible and horrible things that can come from this? Absolutely. But I think what's interesting is we're at the helm of this and we have the opportunity to steer it. And I think one of the other things that just is a theme that comes out of this discussion that I hope it encourages people to think about, one of the biggest things I think people miss when they look at some of this technological innovation and advancement is they're looking very narrow at what they're doing today and saying, well, there's only so much room in this box. So if AI starts pushing up against this, or if technology, then there's no more room. And instead of going, right, but look at all this open space out here. And if we open the box up, there's actually so much more that we can play with that before you couldn't because it was limited to this box. And I think we need more people thinking about that. What are we not doing today? That, man, if we could do it, and some of the examples you use today, I think they're just great ones where you go, we actually couldn't do this in the past. Now we can. That's incredible.
That's a really cool metaphor. I like that. I'm gonna steal that from you if it's okay.
Go for it. That's totally
No, I think
fine.
it's a good way to look at it. It's about expanding. It's not about like taking away what you have. It's gonna be more of it. I think that's really that's the way to look at it.
Okay. Well, I have so enjoyed our conversation, Sven, and I love when I have the opportunity to incorporate the XR tech into this. And I haven't really had enough opportunities to bring that merging of AI and XR into this. And to me, I think this is a huge opportunity for people. And, I know there was kind of the start and stop of it with the pandemic. It was like, for a little bit, it was like, everything's in the metaverse, and it fizzled out a little bit. But again, it goes back to some of the things we talked about before. There was hype and there was marketing going into things that weren't really solving problems. And I hope that people listening to this, it's starting to expand that box for you in going, hey, wait a minute. would this be possible? Because the answer that I'm seeing is things that were formerly impossible are no longer impossible anymore with stuff like this.
Absolutely, couldn't agree more. Thank you very much for having me. It was a great conversation. Really enjoyed it, and yeah, excited for what's to come in our technology world.
Well, thank you so much, Sven, for joining me. Thank you, everybody, for listening and watching. Hopefully, this has challenged your thinking and encouraged you to be excited about the digital future ahead. Thanks, and we will see you on the other side.